Well, it's also difficult for somebody in your line of work, right? Because you're trying to train people in public policy about something where the people who are creating it don't know how it works. And
Yes.
so it's I mean, it's bad enough that, we have a Congress full of people, a tiny fraction of whom have the ability to use the right vocabulary here.
Right.
But, I see it, I mean, you see it in AI, but I also see it in AI powered things like crypto, where the administration is diving in with both feet. And it's like, yeah, crypto, let's go. Let's put all our money in this. And people don't even understand how these markets work. There
Yeah.
are assertions made about crypto markets like, you can always unload what you've got, which doesn't actually seem to be true.
Right.
You
Right.
know, right?
Yes.
And and
Yes.
and it's like how do you regulate something when the people who are supposed to be doing the regulating aren't up to it?
I think, well, and it's even more basic than that. A lot of times it's explaining the difference between AI and Gen AI, right? I think I've had that conversation quite a bit. Just having those sort of really basic understanding, because I actually don't think I don't know if the policymakers really need to understand really the deeply complex technical component to all of it, but some basic stuff, yes, and their staff, yes, right. I think that is pretty important, and also how to use it in their own work. I think that's a really good way to help them do that. We're doing some trainings for congressional staff, but the way that I approach that for future policymakers, right, at Georgetown, is I put them in this program where it's international, and they're with an international group of other students, and I make them deal with a very difficult problem. So the last time we did quantum communications, and they're complaining, they're saying, but this is really nobody really understands quantum or what it is or how to deal with it. How are we supposed to come up with something about it? And I say, yes, yes, exactly. This is what it is. This is what you're that doing policy in this is sort of the 21st century challenge. And this is why you need to be trained in how to think about this, how to create a framework out of something so uncertain and changing. And you can do that. But yeah, there's a certain amount of sort of basic technical understanding that has to be there.
Well, I used to be the editor of Foreign Policy magazine, and we would go and do studies of different kinds about what people were teaching in schools of public policy, right? And so yeah, but one of the things that one of the ones that I did, and it was 8-9 years ago, but it was two things actually, just to give you a sense of what it was. One was, are schools of public policy teaching and requiring ethics
Mm.
discussions?
Hmm.
Guess what the answer to that is. And the other was, are they teaching and requiring the kind of basic technological know-how that will enable somebody to speak and or even read and understand? And the analogy I used to give was, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, if you wanted to go into foreign policy, you had to speak nuke. You had to know the language of nuclear weapons, throw weights, those kind of things. Otherwise, you weren't let into the room. What's very clear, this stuff is actually much more important, because it's not just foreign policy, it's economic policy, it's social policy, it's privacy, it's everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But are schools requiring it? Are schools saying, no, you have to learn this before we will let you out of here?
I think it's starting to be that, but it's not completely that, right? It's not every school. It's more in bits and pieces. They're starting to see that so I would say many colleges have some component of it. Whereas in my opinion, it should be a part of every class, because there is, if you think about technology, there really is no component, there's no place in life in which it doesn't touch. It's very difficult to find a part of our lives in which it's not touching. And it's not that you need to be an expert, or you have to sort of put technology over something where it's not necessary. It's just about putting it in context. And if you're a policymaker, that's your job, right? Is to have context and understanding, and to be able to have different scenarios in your mind about people and communities and the larger context. So I think universities have been, they're slow moving institutions, and they have been slow moving in this space, I think. I will say, I think one of the biggest components that, at least in tech and public policy, that the approach that I've taken is to look at the program as kind of an incubator. I have a background in industry and in civil society and now in academia. And so I think of my program as this little incubator of almost like experiments, right? So let's try this. Let's try this program in AI Policy Lab, which a lot of people do, but let's see if this produces some interesting work, right? Let's see if we can do something here. Let's try this idea of putting students, like I mentioned, in a situation abroad with other students to learn how to make policy around difficult subjects. Let's try this, issue. So like various different programs, and also integrating with the curriculum at Georgetown to try to kind of have this action-oriented knowledge base around technology that builds in things like ethics, that builds in this much more nuanced understanding of how technology is embedded into policy, et cetera. So I think there's a practitioner-led model that sort of institutions are starting to see is really important. In the past, it's been faculty-led, and while that's great and I think important, I just see this sort of different model emerging that I think should emerge, and it's where you have kind of the doers, the people who are bridge makers between different disciplines. The way it is often in technology, you have this kind of multidisciplinary approach. It's a little faster. It's kind of this rapid response research that can help policy more directly. And of course, you still have the longer research. That's super important too. But that's what I mean by the incubator kind of approach. So this rapid response, this kind of the sandbox as part of it. I think those are important, and we've been doing that at Georgetown. And having all of those things happening at once as a part of this kind of ecosystem that you build at a school, I think that model needs to happen at more schools. And you'll still see kind of at the schools like Harvard and MIT and Stanford, they have amazing programs, but they're not always integrated in this way, where they're all kind of orbiting around this center of a practitioner-led kind of program, somebody who's building those bridges where the students are getting hands-on real training. So another example would be, we had a policy hackathon with Anthropic. And that was so valuable to the students, because they basically had to break a new model of Claude, right? So, which they did in like 10 seconds. I remember Anthropic being concerned, would they be able to break it with prompts? And they broke it in like 10 seconds. But the value of having that interaction, with these engineers from Anthropic, that kind of stuff is what is needed. And I think is just not as available to a lot of students.